Africa is the birthplace of human beings. Long, long ago, thousands of years before modern times, the first humans lived in Africa. Scientists and historians have found bones and tools in Africa that show people lived there very early in human history. These early people were hunters and gatherers. They hunted animals and gathered plants and fruits to eat. Over many thousands of years, people slowly learned new skills. They learned how to use fire to cook food and to stay warm. They learned how to make better tools from stone and bone. Around 10,000 years ago, something very important happened. People learned to farm. They started to grow crops like millet and sorghum instead of just hunting. They also kept animals like cattle, sheep, and goats. Farming meant people could stay in one place instead of always moving around. Small villages and communities began to form. Families worked together to grow food and take care of animals. As time went on, some villages grew into bigger communities. People discovered that the land near rivers was very good for farming. The Nile River in North Africa was especially important. The water from the river made the soil very rich and good for growing crops. People settled along the Nile and built strong communities. By this time, people also learned to make pottery, to work with metals, and to trade with each other. Different groups of people developed their own ways of living. They made their own clothes, tools, and homes. Some people became very skilled at different jobs. This is how the first civilizations in Africa began to develop. Africa was starting to become home to great kingdoms and powerful cities. Egypt is one of the most famous ancient civilizations in the world. It grew along the Nile River in North Africa. The Nile River was like a gift to Egypt. Every year, the river would flood and bring rich, black soil to the land. This soil was perfect for growing food. Because of this river, Egypt became very rich and powerful. Around 5,000 years ago, Egyptian kingdoms began to form. Different regions came together to make one big kingdom. A powerful king named Narmer united Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt around 3,100 BCE. This was the start of the first dynasty. After this, Egypt grew stronger and more organized. The Egyptians built amazing things. They constructed huge pyramids as tombs for their pharaohs or kings. The most famous pyramid is the Great Pyramid of Giza. Building these pyramids showed how powerful the pharaohs were and how many workers they could control. The pyramids still stand today after more than 4,000 years. The Egyptians were also very clever. They invented writing using pictures called hieroglyphics. They made paper from papyrus plants that grew along the Nile. They invented new tools and weapons. They developed mathematics and studied the stars. They made medicines and performed surgeries. Egyptian doctors were some of the best in the ancient world. Egyptian society had different levels. At the top was the pharaoh, who was seen as a god. Below him were nobles and priests. Then came skilled workers, farmers, and at the bottom were slaves. The Egyptians believed in an afterlife, so they preserved dead bodies as mummies and filled tombs with treasure and food for the next life. Egypt remained powerful and great for about 3,000 years. South of Egypt, along the Nile River, was another great kingdom called Kush. Kush was located in what is now Sudan. The people there, called Nubians, were strong and successful. For a long time, Egypt controlled parts of Nubia. But the Nubians never stopped being their own people with their own culture. Around 800 BCE, something amazing happened. A strong Nubian leader named Pi conquered Egypt. He became the pharaoh of Egypt too. This was surprising because now an African king ruled Egypt instead of Egyptians ruling themselves. Pi's family ruled Egypt for almost 100 years. These pharaohs are sometimes called the Black Pharaohs. They followed Egyptian religion and customs, but kept their Nubian identity. The kingdom of Kush had two main capitals. The first was Napata, which was a religious center. Later, the capital moved to Meroe, which became a great trading city. Meroe was located where two rivers met, which made it a perfect place for trade. Merchants came from many lands to buy and sell goods. The people of Kush were excellent at many things. They were great builders who constructed pyramids and temples, just like Egyptians. They were skilled metalworkers who made weapons and tools. They also traded goods like gold, ivory, and animal skins. These goods were very valuable, and people wanted them very much. Kush had a powerful army and strong leaders. Kings and queens ruled the kingdom together. Women in Kush had more power and respect than in many other ancient societies. The kingdom lasted for over 1,000 years. Eventually, around 350 CE, the kingdom of Aksum from the east conquered Kush. But the memory of Kush remained important in African history. In the highlands of East Africa, in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea, a great empire rose called Aksum. Aksum was one of the four greatest powers in the world during the 3rd century CE, along with Rome, Persia, and China. This shows how important and powerful Aksum was. Aksum grew rich through trade. The kingdom controlled important trade routes along the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. Merchants from Aksum traded with Egypt, Arabia, India, Persia, and even countries far away like China. They exchanged goods like ivory, gold, frankincense, and animal skins for cloth, glass, spices, and other treasures from distant lands. This trade made Aksum very wealthy and powerful. The Aksumites were great builders and craftsmen. They carved huge stone towers called stelae, which were monuments to their kings and gods. Some stelae were very tall and decorated with beautiful designs. They also built temples, churches, and palaces. The city of Aksum was a major center of learning and culture. Around the year 330 CE, something important happened. The king of Aksum, named Ezana, accepted Christianity as the official religion. This made Aksum one of the first Christian kingdoms in the world. Christianity spread throughout the kingdom and became very important to Aksumite culture. The Aksumites developed their own form of Christianity that was different from other Christian groups. Aksum created its own written language called Guizi. This language was used for writing important documents and religious texts. The Axumites also minted their own coins, which shows they were a strong, independent kingdom. Aksum remained powerful and important for many centuries. When the kingdom's power finally declined after 900 CE, its influence on Ethiopia and East Africa continued for hundreds of years. In West Africa, south of the Sahara Desert, 3 great kingdoms rose to power one after another. These kingdoms became very rich and powerful because they controlled important trade routes. The trade of gold and salt made these kingdoms extremely wealthy and strong. The first great kingdom was Ghana. Ghana appeared around 700 CE and lasted until about 1200 CE. The Kingdom of Ghana did not include the country of Ghana today, but it was located in a similar region. Ghana became famous for gold. The gold came from mines in the south, and merchants bought it to sell in North Africa and Europe. In return, Ghana received salt from the Sahara Desert. Salt was very valuable because it helped preserve food. Ghana's king controlled all the gold and became extremely rich and powerful. The second kingdom was Mali. Mali appeared around 1235 CE after Ghana's power decreased. Mali became even richer and more powerful than Ghana. A great leader named Sundiata founded Mali and made it strong. Later, another famous leader named Mansa Musa ruled Mali. Mansa Musa was so rich that when he traveled to Mecca for religious pilgrimage, he brought tons of gold with him. This trip was famous all over the world. Mali's most important cities were Timbuktu and Jan. These cities became famous centers of learning. Great universities were built there where scholars studied religion, mathematics, and science. Timbuktu had a famous university called Sankore that had thousands of books and many teachers. The third kingdom was Songhai. Songhai began around 1350 CE and lasted until 1591 CE. A strong leader named Sunny Ali made Songhai very powerful. Songhai controlled even more land than Mali. The cities of Timbuktu and Gao became important centers under Songhai rule too. These 3 kingdoms showed that Africa had great civilizations with strong leaders, rich cities, and important centers of learning. Around 3,000 years ago, a major movement of people happened in Africa. Groups of people who spoke Bantu languages began to move from West Central Africa to other parts of Africa. This movement is called the Bantu expansion. It took hundreds of years, but these people gradually moved east and south, spreading across much of Africa. The Bantu people were farmers and herders. They brought new skills with them. They knew how to farm crops, keep cattle and sheep, and work with iron to make tools and weapons. When they arrived in new places, they mixed with people already living there. Some groups stayed, and some groups moved on to find new lands. The Bantu expansion reached southern Africa and created strong kingdoms there. One of the most famous was the Kingdom of Great Zimbabwe. This kingdom rose to power around 1100 CE and lasted until about 1450 CE. Great Zimbabwe was built by the Shona people, a Bantu group. The kingdom's capital was a huge city with beautiful stone buildings. The stones were stacked perfectly without using any cement or mortar. Great Zimbabwe became rich and powerful through gold trade. Merchants from the Swahili coast came to buy gold, ivory, and other goods. In return, they brought things like cloth, glass, and salt. The kingdom exported its gold through the Swahili ports to traders across the Indian Ocean. At its height, Great Zimbabwe had about 10,000 people living there. The Great Zimbabwe Kingdom also had strong rulers. The king lived in the Great Enclosure, which was a huge stone building at the center of the city. Common people lived outside these walls. The kingdom controlled a huge area of land. By around 1450 CE, Great Zimbabwe's power began to decrease. People moved to other areas, but the memory of this great kingdom remained important in African history. On the east coast of Africa, along the Indian Ocean, a special culture developed called Swahili civilization. This happened because of trade. Starting around the 7th or 8th century, Arab and Persian merchants came to East Africa to trade. They met African people living on the coast, and together they created something new and beautiful. The Swahili people were a mixture of African and Arab cultures. They spoke a language called Swahili that mixed African words with Arabic words. They practiced Islam, which came from the Arab traders. They became excellent merchants and traders themselves. The Swahili coast had many important trading cities. Cities like Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, and Lama became busy ports. Ships came from all over the Indian Ocean, bringing goods to trade. From Arabia, Persia, and India came cloth, glass, spices, and fine pottery. From China came silk and porcelain. From inside Africa came gold, ivory, animal skins, and shells. The Swahili traders were smart business people. They controlled trade between the African interior and the outside world. Merchants from inside Africa brought gold and ivory to the coast. The Swahili bought these goods and sold them to traders from distant lands. This made the Swahili cities very rich and powerful. The Swahili built beautiful cities and towns. They constructed stone buildings, mosques for prayer, and markets for trading. Archaeologists have found coins, pottery, and jewelry that show how wealthy and cultured these cities were. The Swahili coast reached its greatest power between the 12th and 15th centuries. Unfortunately, in the 16th century, Portuguese explorers came to the Swahili coast. They wanted to control the trade and became violent and destructive. They conquered the cities and destroyed the peaceful trade networks that had lasted for hundreds of years. The Swahili coast never recovered its former glory, but its culture and influence lasted and shaped East African civilization. Starting in the 15th century, European ships began coming to the coast of Africa. At first, Europeans just wanted to trade for gold and other goods. But soon, they wanted something else, people. They wanted to capture Africans and force them to be slaves in the Americas. This terrible trade is called the Atlantic Slave Trade. For about 400 years, from the 1500s to the 1800s, millions of African people were captured, chained, and forced onto ships. They were taken across the Atlantic Ocean to work on plantations in America. Nearly 13 million Africans were forced into slavery this way. About 2 million of them died during the terrible journey across the ocean. The Atlantic slave trade had horrible effects on Africa. Whole families were torn apart. Strong, young people were taken away, which meant less workers to farm and build in Africa. Communities lost their members and became weaker. Wars started between groups fighting over who would be captured and sold. The continents lost millions of its strongest people. The slave trade hurt Africa's development very much. While Europe and America were growing rich from trade and becoming more powerful, Africa was losing people and wealth. Africa fell further and further behind in power and development. The slave trade made Africa poorer and weaker. Resources that could have been used to build schools, roads, and cities were instead used for the cruel trade in human beings. The Atlantic slave trade finally ended in the 1800s. Many countries passed laws saying slavery was illegal, but the damage to Africa was already very great. The loss of so many people, the wars it caused, and the wealth it took away hurt Africa for a very long time. The effects of the slave trade can still be seen in Africa today. In the late 1800s, European countries rushed to take control of Africa. This period is called the Scramble for Africa. Between 1880 and 1914, European powers raced to claim as much African land as possible. They divided almost the entire continent among themselves without asking the African people what they wanted. European countries had several reasons for this colonization. First, they wanted Africa's resources like gold, diamonds, copper, and other minerals. They also wanted agricultural goods like cotton, rubber, and cocoa that could be sold for money. Second, they wanted to expand their power and compete with other European countries. If one country had colonies, other countries wanted colonies too. Third, many Europeans believed they were superior to African people and thought they had the right to rule them. Technology helped Europeans take control. Steamships and railroads allowed them to move soldiers and supplies quickly. Quinine medicine helped prevent malaria, so Europeans could stay healthy in Africa. Guns and weapons were much more advanced than what African warriors had. With these advantages, Europeans conquered and controlled the land. In 1884 to 85, European powers held a meeting in Berlin, Germany. They made rules about how to divide Africa. They drew borders on maps without caring about the people living there. These borders separated families and ethnic groups and put enemies together. The borders created many problems that Africa still faces today. European colonizers took Africa's wealth and resources for themselves. They built railroads and ports not to help African people, but to take resources out of Africa. They forced Africans to work in mines and on farms for very little money. They made Africans follow European laws and Christianity. They took away Africans' freedom and right to govern themselves. For many years, European countries ruled Africa and made it very difficult for African people. In the 1950s and 1960s, African people rose up against European rule. They wanted freedom and the right to govern themselves. Many countries fought for independence, and many African leaders emerged to fight for their people's freedom. Ghana became the first African colony to gain independence in 1957 under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah. Other countries followed quickly. In 1960, which is called the Year of Africa, 17 African nations declared independence. By 1980, most African countries had freed themselves from European rule. The last country to gain independence was South Africa in 1994, when Nelson Mandela became president. This was important because South Africa had a system called apartheid that treated black people as less important than white people. Independence brought hope, but also challenges. African countries had to build new governments and systems. They had to heal from the damage caused by colonization. The artificial borders created by Europeans caused conflicts between different ethnic groups. New leaders had to figure out how to develop their countries and improve people's lives. Some African countries have become successful. They have built schools, hospitals, and roads. They have developed industries and created jobs. Countries like Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa have made progress. But Africa still faces challenges. Some countries have poverty, disease, and political problems. Climate change brings droughts and floods that hurt farming. Many Africans still struggle with education and health care. Today, Africa is a continent of 54 countries with over 1 billion people. Africa has young people who are educated and ambitious. Many African countries are working together through an organization called the African Union. They are trying to increase trade between African countries and solve problems together. Africa has great potential for the future. The continent has natural resources, young people, and strong cultures. With good leadership and hard work, Africa can continue to develop and become more powerful and prosperous.